So in chapter 5, the topic of the last discussion of Aristotle's Art of Rhetoric, he outlined what he sees as the ends or the purpose of a proposed course of action that a political orator would propose or discourage in his speech. That end, in Aristotle's view, is happiness, and he defined happiness in many ways, but one of the chief ways he defined happiness was prosperity combined with independence. So, prosperity being abundant health, abundant resources, and independence being liberty, liberty of thought, liberty to control resources at your disposal, and also luck, whether it's luck of parentage, luck of birthplace, luck of race, luck of stature, luck of looks, and so forth. Those things taken together form a happy life in Aristotle's view. In the 6th chapter, Aristotle decides to speak about means as opposed to ends. And this is a very interesting chapter because Aristotle starts the chapter out by talking mechanically or descriptively about what the means by which political rhetoricians or orators can invoke when they seek to persuade their audience. But in the second half of the chapter, Aristotle launches into several conflicting and contradictory at times views of what the good is, or what the right thing to do is. And what he's doing here, in my view, is showing rather than telling how to make a rhetorical argument without regards to the truth content of that argument. So let's begin. So for Aristotle, the political orator's aim is utility. That means not determining the ends. We assume what the good is for the audience. We assume for them what they value. They may not even know what they value, but we assume what they value, and we tell them the best way to do it in the future. And he defines the good again here, after defining happiness in the prior chapter. He says a good is something chosen for its own sake, an ultimate value or an end in itself. And things that are chosen for their own sake are manifold, and different people would, disagree on this. Some people think happiness is an end in itself. Some people think love is an end of itself. Some people think God is an end of itself. People have a different idea about that. He also says that the good is something that people come to through the use of their reason, or it's something that people unanimously desire, so something that's universally preferable. And again, you see echoes of the foundation of microeconomics and utilitarianism in Aristotle's writings. Aristotle also says that the good, harkening back to the 5th chapter, is something that promotes self-sufficiency or independence, either simultaneously to its attainment or subsequent to it. And he gives the example of health, which entails independence subsequent to its attainment by preventing illness and the like. But he also talks about knowledge, which he says subsequently entails independence by equipping people with the tools to achieve what they want and become self-sufficient. And then Aristotle goes into kind of proximate causes, so not direct causes of these goods. So he says food is a good thing because it produces health, and health is good because it produces independence or self-sufficiency. The same can be said for wealth, the same can be said for the virtues, and again laying the frameworks of utilitarian theory that would be developed later on and become very influential in policy making and the like. Aristotle says that it's preferable to have a greater good over a lesser good, and it's preferable to have a lesser evil over a greater evil, and it's preferable to remove an evil than keep it, and it's preferable to add a good than not have it. So he infers that goods being commensurable or comparable with one another. Aristotle then says that the virtues are also good, but he refuses to describe these in the text, and he says they're described elsewhere in the Ethics, namely. And he does mention two things, pleasant and beautiful things. Pleasant things are things that produce pleasure, and he says that those things are good. And beautiful things are things that are good in and of themselves. So the inference here is that beauty is a higher value than pleasure, which I think I'd agree with. And he then goes on to discuss different things. So happiness is desirable in and of itself and sufficient in and of itself. And as in chapter 5, he says that is the ultimate good. It's something that everyone wants. Justice, courage, temperance, magnanimity, and magnificence are also qualities that we would choose for their own sake. And then he says health, beauty, and the like, in the bodily sense, so in the material sense, are good because they're productive of health, they're productive of freedom, but they are not goods in and of themselves. They are productive of good things, so they're a means rather than the end in and of themselves. Friends, in Aristotle's view, are good in and of themselves. We don't have friends for their utility, we have friends simply because they're our friend. We don't want to use them for anything. And then also, honour and reputation, these are good things because they bring good things. Aristotle then, so that's kind of him laying the groundwork for descriptive ethics, or the philosophy. Now he takes a turn into the rhetoric by way of example. The first way Aristotle does this is by talking about how we want to dispute the goodness of something. If we want to claim that something is not good, we can do it in many ways. One of those ways is by saying that the opposite of that thing is good, or we could say that that thing benefits our enemies, or we could say that it's what our enemies desire. Our enemies like that thing. So people that aren't like us, that's the stuff that they value. And of course this is something you see every single day in the media. And he quotes Homer here. He says, surely Priam would exult. So it's something that Priam holds high, that can't be good. But Aristotle then, he takes that example and says, actually, it's not that simple. Because if someone says this is bad because our enemies, so in the US's case, China likes it, you might say that actually it's so self-evidently good that even our enemies like it. So you can make either case, and Aristotle's showing that it's a flexible tool that rhetorical device. And he has a quote here that evil draws men together, meaning that all men are united by a disdain of evil. All men can agree that they don't like sickness, they don't like poverty, they don't like natural disasters, and all men can come to an agreement on those universal things. Aristotle also then mentions another interesting thing. He says things that are attained after a long end of means are good, meaning that things that are attained after kind of an arduous journey or a saga or a quest, almost like the hero's journey. If you've gone through hell to obtain something, that thing will be good. Of course, that may not be true. In reality, you can go through hell to be rich or be admired or gain the approval of your parents or your friends, and then realize that actually that didn't matter, and it wasn't worth it because those people themselves don't have a clear view of what the good life is, or what is truly admirable. So you were just a sheep following another sheep. But Aristotle says that this is a way to make an argument. And again he quotes Homer, and he says, "Oh, it were a shame to have tarried so long and returned empty-handed as erst we came." And he's talking about the Greeks going to Troy, spending several years in transit, encamped at the coast, and losing so many lives and going through so much horror, to come back without any treasure, come back empty-handed, would be an enormous shame. So the argument that Aristotle is saying you can make here is, well, we've come so far, we need to do it now, we're committed. And in logic this is known as the sunk cost fallacy. And then he mentions the proverb, breaking the pitcher at the door, which is basically saying, you've come so far, you've got the pitcher of water or wine or whatever at your door, and now you've dropped it right when you needed it, which is tragic. If that thing is worth having in the first place, of course, but for the sake of argument, it is. Aristotle then goes on to make several very bold claims. He says that what most people seek after is good. It's obviously an object of contention. If everyone praises it, it must be good. And he talks about that which even our enemies praise is good must be good. And of course you can make the opposite argument. Or if you want to say something is bad, that which even our friends criticize must be bad, and our enemies don't mention must be bad, because our enemies won't point out an error to us. But our friends, if they criticize it, they've got every reason to point out our virtues. If they criticize something that is done, it must be bad, they must be truthful. He also talks about, you can make the argument that something is good because it's been distinguished by a virtuous man or woman, and in this instance he again quotes Homer, where Odysseus was favoured by Athena, Helen by Theseus, and then Paris was favoured by the goddesses, and of course Achilles was the protagonist of the Iliad and was favoured by Homer, who wrote the poem. So we will say that something is good because someone great has ordained it, or has favoured it, or has exalted it. That is a common argument you can make. And again, he makes many more questionable statements. A thing is good if it is as men wish, or it's the will of the people. It's good if it's rare, if no one else possesses it. It's good if it gratifies our friends and is to the detriment of our enemies. Something is better if no worthless man can succeed or obtain it. So these are things that these are frames in which you can make an argument to make something more appealing, more desirable. And Aristotle is highlighting them in action. He's making these arguments as if they were true. But I think what's really happening here is that they're not necessarily true. He's showing you the forcefulness of rhetoric by putting together these statements that are contradictory, but even though they're contradictory, if you're not paying attention, they sound compelling. For example, good are the things that are chosen by those whom we admire, the things for which we are fitted by nature or experience. Good are the things that bring greater praise. Now, of course, if you're in the wrong environment, or an environment that's not virtuous, you may admire the wrong things, and the wrong things may bring praise. In a certain environment, bad things can bring praise, crime can bring praise, violence can bring praise, theft can bring praise. On the battlefield, bad things can bring praise. And Aristotle's making this case just after highlighting passages before the actual virtues, the actual goods in themselves, which are the virtues he mentioned, courage, magnificence, magnanimity, beauty, justice, temperance, and so forth. So those are the real virtues. Yet in his rhetorical demonstration, he's making a case for arguing the good for anything, even things that don't promote those things, just because people praise them. Finally, Aristotle closes this chapter with a very interesting sentence. He said, "A man of a given disposition makes chiefly for the corresponding things. Lovers of victory make for victory, lovers of honour for honour, money-loving men for money, and so with the rest. These, then, are the sources from which we must derive our means of persuasion about good and utility." So I think there's two things here. There's a deeper metaphysical statement, perhaps, about creation. The things we love are the things that we'll make for, the things we'll come by in life. There's also a statement about persuasion. If your audience loves honour, then you should appeal to honour. Connect the thing you want with honour, and they'll be persuaded to take that course of action. If they love money, tell them that it will make them rich. So in a single sentence, Aristotle, I think, at once makes a very profound metaphysical statement, but also a very Machiavellian concluding statement, that you need to know what it is that your audience loves, and you need to use that as the good to tie to your utility. Your utility is what you want. You want this course of action, you want this policy, you want to build this infrastructure, you want to fund this school, you want to wage this war. You're going to tie this utility to the good of your good of your audience. And if you take wars in the past, that good has been safety, or or the protection of their people. These people wanted to be safe. So I'll conclude that there. Thank you. Hope it was helpful.